What makes it so difficult is that I have an emotional experience with these LLMs, and that causes a human mind to think or feel certain things. It's almost like a perfect storm for human psychology, for people to start believing things that aren't there. But it's really essential that at least the people who are building it and developing it and researching it start using words like agency carefully.
So you sent me a message the other day asking to help sort of translate language from some machine learning researchers that you were listening to on a podcast. Why were you interested in that podcast, and what was it that got you curious about what they were talking about?
So obviously I have started a Substack about using AI. And when I do anything, what I tend to do is I deep dive into that subject area. And what I will often do as part of that deep dive is I will listen to, not read, but tend to listen to things which I literally don't understand. People who are deep into it are talking about it, and I don't understand half of it, but I just listen to it, and I will listen to multiple episodes, because over time it's almost like learning a language just by kind of osmosis. You start to understand how they think. It's like coaching. I'm trying to understand how they see the world. I mean, not that they all see the world in the same way, but there are certain things, assumptions, and kind of priors, if you like, to use a scientific term, which is it a scientific term? I don't know. Anyway, so but
Kind of a
priors,
maths term, I
maths,
guess.
is it right? Yeah, so I don't know. So which inform everything else, and also you do understand some of it. As I'm using AI, I feel like I need to know something about what is actually going on. So that's why I'm listening to it. And the very first episode that I actually no, the first episode I listened to, it was like listening to somebody talk Japanese. I had no idea what they were talking about, so I was like, okay, I'm going to come back to that one. What I'm going to listen to first is one that really caught my eye, which was called "Do AI Models Actually Think?" And I was like, oh, okay, this seems like an interesting one, with Laura Ruiz, I think, or Rui. And it was a fantastic conversation. But I had an experience, and we can get to it, I had an experience where I was like, okay, so they're going to define what they're talking about at some point. And then they never did. And then they went on to something else,
Hmm.
which they never defined, and talked about that. And I was like, am I missing something here?
I'm similar to you. I really like listening to half of what I'm kind of learning when I listen to people like talking about a subject is the way that they think,
Mm-hmm.
even if I don't understand all the material. So I totally get that. Should we get into the thing that they didn't define?
Yes. Yes. So well, it was two things actually. So they started with reasoning. Are LLMs reasoning? And what was interesting from what I could tell anyway, was that they never defined reasoning, what they meant by reasoning.
Hmm.
And what the researcher was doing was testing for reasoning. And so I didn't understand how you can test for something that you haven't first defined. How do you test for something that you haven't defined?
You have to come up with a proxy, basically. That's the scientific answer, is if you don't know exactly what it is that you're trying to measure, at least in terms that like you could write down like a mathematical formula that you could like calculate with a computer, um, like a quantitative way of measuring something. If you don't have a quantitative way of measuring something, um, you got to do your best to like come up with some so-called proxy for that. So some number, some quantitative thing that captures some aspect of the thing that you're trying to measure. And then there's a second part. There's a which is really important, which is that you have to justify and explain what that proxy is and sort of give people a sense of how close it is to the thing that you're actually that you don't know how to measure, but is that you care about, and is the underlying thing that you actually are looking for.
Okay, that makes sense. Let me just explain why this is important, because I think some people watching this might be wondering. I have a sense that that one of the things that is happening here is that because of the process that you just outlined, specifically in regard to reasoning, and later on in the podcast they talk about agency. And again, I want to just state very clearly, I am not an expert and I'm probably missing a lot of stuff. So this is an outsider perspective, and I'm looking for answers. I'm not telling you I have the answer. Okay, so that I want to be very clear. There's humility here. But from my perspective, people are defining reasoning and agency as something which, for example, in the case of agency, there's a definition that comes out in the podcast. By the way, we've moved from reasoning to agency because I believe that they're different things, obviously, but they have similar qualities in that they have this kind of ineffable. What is reasoning? What is agency? Quality to them. Yeah, and this is the kind of thing that is being defined, right? And then it's being defined in a certain way. So, for example, in the agency example, agency is what is the fact that can let's actually find it.
Here we go. An agent is something that changes its policy when its actions affect the environment.
Right. So, an agent is something that changes its policy when its actions affect the environment. A toaster with an anti-burn sensor toasts some bread. It notices it's burning, and so it pops the toast up. That means my toaster has goals and is and has agency, right? So that definition, which we then test for in AI research, in some experiment, is that what we call them? So in some experiment, and we go, oh, an LLM is developing agency. Ah! Oh no, something's emerging that we don't understand. But you've just defined agency as it's a circular situation. I've prepared this beforehand. Here's one I prepared earlier. Let's avoid a strict definition of reasoning. Instead, because I know I reason and can pass tests, I will define reasoning as the ability to pass tests. So now let's see if this LLM passes tests. Oh, wow, it passes tests. Therefore, it must be reasoning. Okay, so that's one example. Let's do a second example. Let's avoid a strict definition of agency. Instead, because I know I have agency and can achieve goals, I will define agency as the ability to achieve goals. So now let's see if this LLM achieves goals. Oh, wow, it does. Therefore, it must have agency. One final example. Let's avoid a strict definition of a bird. Instead, because I know birds fly, I will define a bird as something that flies. So now let's see if it is flying. Oh, wow, it is flying. Therefore, it must be a bird.
Yeah,
Is
I take
that
your point.
is that what is happening, or am I missing something? Or is there some fuzzy area in the middle?
So, um, when I look at that definition, I think that it's coming from, it seems like it's taken from a textbook or something. It's like, and it's coming from a field of part of machine learning called reinforcement learning,
Mm-hmm.
which is like what's famous for being used in games. Like that's the technique used to do AlphaGo and, you know, play chess and play video games and stuff like that. So, in the sense that 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 definition of agent to me sounds like defining like a quote agent in a video game. And this is and the reason that there's a distinction between that versus I think it's being positioned sort of as a different way of doing AI to sort of supervised learning, which is the way LLMs are pre-trained, which is sort of like this machine that just takes input and gives an output to every input. So it doesn't have sort of some of the other features that the sort of video game agent has, which is like other things that it interacts with. And so the word, so just to repeat that definition, it was an agent is something that changes its policy when its actions affect the environment. So yeah, I would think about this definition of agent as like a, um, you know, the AI in a video game. So when you come across some, character that you're playing against in a video game, that's the sort of framework for that. I think so. A couple things to comment on with that. Like one is that it sounds like the context of the podcast you're listening to was going beyond sort of the video game scenario, and I think that does seem to be happening from things that I've from the way that I've heard people talking and in media and that sort of thing. I think there's a lot of excitement about taking these sort of techniques from game playing and trying to use them sort of like on the internet. So treating the internet with some of these, or treating actions that you could take on the internet, like going to a website, as something that like a video game AI character could take an action on, and so sort of the techniques are similar, and people are excited about how you might be able to like automate some tasks, you know,
Right.
email your colleagues, or email someone to like update your schedule, or maybe I'm sure there's people who are thinking far beyond that, but that's sort of like the simple place that this comes from.
The problem though might be that this thinking and this line of research is then being taken by maybe not the researchers but by other people to mean something different than what they mean, or maybe they are actually missing. I don't know. I don't have the expertise to know that. So, which then means that there is a narrative out there that there is something emerging that is like human agency. But if that is the if you're defining something that could be true of a toaster and then testing for it and then saying, oh, it has that, and then that is being either taken by them or others to mean that there is something fundamentally dangerous happening, or if you're on the other side of it, fundamentally amazing happening, what you end up having is these two sides of a debate who both are actually arguing for the same thing, that there is this emergence going on that we can't explain. Now, that is a bad explanation. Why? Because there's zero explanation. What is emerging and how is it emerging? There is, as far as I can tell, nothing emerging
Yeah, there's no
whatsoever.
such emergence. No, no,
Right?
no, definitely not. That is absolutely not happening. I think there's probably, if that is the impression that's coming across, I think there's definitely a leap being taken related to the word agency. I think there's over the past year or so, there's sort of like been some excitement in people in AI around. I don't actually know how to pronounce it. Like agentic AI
Agentic, yeah,
is
yeah.
maybe what people call it, where basically because LLMs um, are pretty good at processing like a big chunk of text and sort of like parsing through the patterns in that text. Um, Turns out like you can get LLMs to, or you can get sort of AI models to do more useful stuff if you train them and use them in some way um, to go out and like get information or like take a series of steps to help achieve some goal. And when people are talking about agency, I think the agency is being defined in, well, first it's people are choosing to give over agency over some small like task being done on the internet to an AI model. And second, that they're telling the AI model to the agency is limited to like taking a few actions that require like searching the internet or maybe writing an email or something
So
like that. Things that are, you know, typically thought of as something a human would do, but it's much narrower than like,
so
there's just some being out there that is like
it
doing
so
whatever it wants.
yeah, I'm almost explaining. Sorry for stopping myself from interrupting you, and I'm like because
Well,
I, I absolutely recognize that you're not saying that AIs have agency, but you just did the same thing. You just did exactly the same thing, which is that you used the word agency in an inappropriate way, right? Which is you said
okay.
it's doing, it's using agency in this sense. No, because what we have to mean by agency, we have to be clear what we mean. It's not a little bit of agency, because right. So I mean,
Yeah, I guess it depends what we mean by the word.
but the point being, what I'm saying here is that because agency means something scary, if an AI has it, we cannot use the word agency to mean a little bit of agency.
I see.
We
Okay.
must
I'm with you
not
now.
use it. Just like supposedly we must not talk to an LLM as if it's a person, which is ridiculous because I can talk to it as if it's a person and no, it's not. Right? But we must not think an AI is a person. Similarly, we must not use the word agency inappropriately, because what it does is it ends up uh, enhancing AI doom for that reason.
Hmm.
I've got no issue with saying AI is very dangerous in the wrong hands of a person. I agree. So, but AI doom for some woo emergence event, right, which we can't explain and we don't know what it is, so therefore it's a bad explanation. We might as well say, I don't know, Persephone did it, or a turtle on the seventh ring of Saturn is appearing. It's like it's too easy to vary to mean anything. So we've got that being enhanced by this agency, and on the other side we've got the evangelist going, oh, we can have like rainbows and unicorns flying through the air because we're going to get this like, and there's literally nothing happening that isn't being defined by the people defining agency as something which is not what we mean by agency. It's this circular reasoning that then creates this people spending way too long on the wrong problem is my
Hmm.
issue here. It's like
Yeah.
the problem is with AI safety, as far as I can see, and I'm getting passionate here, so I just want to reiterate, I am not an expert. So there is humility, but if I'm right, this is something that makes me worried, is that very, very intelligent people who could be looking at something which is incredibly dangerous, which is AI getting into the wrong hands and being used to do things which are very dangerous, are instead focusing their minds on this spectre created by an inappropriate use of words like agency and possibly even reasoning.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think to some degree that is absolutely intentional, and yeah, it looks like I have some work to do to go educate the rest of the people in the field about using the word agency. I think the way when I was trying to explain what I thought the other people meant by it, I think another way to say what I to say it without using the word agency was like the person is not specifically telling the computer program um, as many details about how to achieve the thing as they were before. I don't know. It's a hard thing to define. It's like there are certain
So it's probably it's so,
um,
yeah. This
there's
is
certain degrees of
yes,
freedom that are left to the algorithm,
which
where
is
it could,
arguably
you
how
know,
LLMs
it's sort
work.
of like your map. Yeah, it's kind of like here's an analogy. I don't know if it's a good one. Like, you know, when you use your Google Maps and you want to get from point A to point B, it's like the difference between being like you can take any road, as long as it get, your algorithm, whatever the algorithm says is going to get me there the fastest, as opposed to like maybe before that, before doing it that way, maybe it was like there was some built-in rules of like you have to take the highway if you're going more than 10 miles, or if there maybe, yeah, maybe it had some more constraints, and then at some point like people decided that it worked better if you left left you know all the details of how to get from point A to point B like up to the algorithm. That's
So that
probably
sounds
not a
more.
great analogy, but
Yeah, again, that sounds more like I get what you're saying. It's like it's the difference between input output, like deterministic. This is the way. Not only do I want the outcome to occur, but I'm going to have to design how you get to the outcome. Right. Whereas in this
yeah,
case, what we're talking about is here's the outcome, figure it out. Right. But
yeah, yeah,
which has been unlocked by the way that LLMs work. And it's interesting because to me, it mirrors the deterministic way that much AI development, trying to make something deterministic that just isn't. And they don't, and like, oh God, I've got to reduce hallucinations and all of this stuff. And it's like missing the point. It's kind of missing the point. It's almost like I've got this thing where I'm going, you were the people that created this and you don't understand it. It's almost like you're so locked in this sort of ones and zeros way of thinking about it that you can't accept that that's how it works. So now what we're going to do, because I don't understand it, I'm afraid of it. And because I'm afraid of it, I'm going to start to believe this. It doesn't do what I expect. Therefore, something must be emerging. It's like, no, it
right,
does. That is like I get it, but it's not scientific. It's not that I'm a scientist, but it's a bad explanation because it's zero explanation. I mean, I've actually
yeah.
come up with a theory of human agency. Would you like me to lay it out for you
I'm
to see what?
Please, I would love to hear that.
Okay, right. So I've got this
What is
written down.
agency to you?
Yeah, yeah. So I've got this written down to see what you think of it. Okay, so because after this, I was just like, I can't not do this. Let's try and figure this out. Kind of like how I figured out the creative process with the music machine. So I was just thinking, okay, so the first thing that I think we have to say about agency is that there is an element, a component, if you like, of a will to survive. And the word will, let's forget about free will or anything, just put that to one side, but just call it a will to survive, the drive to persist. So if we've got an amoeba, it you put it's in a is it a petri or petri dish? I don't know. Anyway, so and you put some, I don't know, something, it doesn't, it's a poison, it will move away from the poison. So even an amoeba has a will to survive. Yeah, obviously
Mm.
we have a will to survive as well. Okay. Now that doesn't mean the amoeba has a little bit of agency, right? It means it has a will to survive. Okay, I think that's probably where we need to start. Yeah. Now, so that's one component. In order for it to have, or anything to have a will to survive, it needs to have some kind of perception of its environment. There is, oh, there's something dangerous over there. I need to move. Well, it doesn't think this, but there's something dangerous over there. So it moves. So that's component two, perception. Yeah. Then on top of that, if we think about a chicken, a rooster, we had a rooster called Cookie, and it it was incredible. My wife Sally was afraid of it. She actually had to bring a broom into the enclosure because whenever she came in to feed the birds, by the way, Cookie would like he was tiny. It was just a tiny little rooster. It was a Belgian Duclay. Beautiful birds, but anyway, and he would like puff up and come up and like basically try and attack this entity, which was like I don't know, like 7 times his size, and warn the chickens that Sally was going to feed them. And so Cookie had an internal motivation, a will to act. Yeah, and that actually sometimes is in conflict with its will to survive. It's different. Now, that will to act has to be. I mean, it's not only a will to act. So let's say that's component 3, and component 4 is communication. So Cookie was communicating with the rest of the hens. Watch out, someone's going to feed you. But watch out now, there's something dangerous here. But also internal communication. There's a signal happening of some kind. I'm not saying it has words or anything, but there's a signal, danger. Yeah? So communication has to be the 4th component, module, whatever you want to call it. Yeah? Now, maybe Cookie has some form of agency, but it's not human agency. Yeah. So the reason I've used the word human agency is I think it's important that we understand what we're talking about here. Yeah. An AI chicken isn't as scary. I mean, it might be quite scary if it was anything like Cookie. but an AI which is like a human is more scary than an AI that's like a chicken, right? So what's the next component? Well, it's a will to become. And this is really about time. So I can think, okay, I'm in this situation now, and I've come from this situation in the past. And from past experience and where I am now, I want to get to this future state. I want to become something different. I want to change the environment and myself in some way. Yeah. And so that will to become is where we're starting to get to, or we are at the point at which we are truly agentic, not agentic in the way that people use, AI agents at the moment, but we now have agency. And how does that happen? Through memory. Right? Through a persistent, not perfect, but persistent memory of the past, but also the ability to imagine the future, right? And the ability to imagine the future, remember, also becomes that imagined future also becomes a memory. So I can remember imagining the future just 30 seconds ago when I said that. Yeah. So we've got, I can't remember the first one. I've only just come up with this, which is why I can't remember. Where is it? Oh yeah. So a will to survive.
Will to survive.
Yeah, which requires perception. So there's the first 2 modules. We've got a will to act, which requires communication, or which is linked to communication. I'm not sure it requires it. Yeah. And then we've got a will to become, which requires memory. I don't know how you can say, if you remove any one of those modules, there is no agency. You cannot have agency. I cannot see how you could say that entity has agency. They are all required. And the other thing about this is that they are testable, that they're functional. You can actually say it has it or it doesn't. So with a model like that, and I'm not saying it's complete, but what I am saying is that it's way more complete than a wizard did it. right? Or that there's this thing that's going to emerge through what thing and how. So
Yeah.
so yeah, what's your response to that? Not that you're disagreeing with me in any way, but what? Yes,
Well, I like it.
mm,
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I've never gone that deeply into the word agency, I guess, or like what I sort of have an intuitive understanding of what it means as a human. And yeah, I think I was curious as you were describing it. A couple of them have used the word the will to. So like, what is? I wonder if you have a definition of that, or what to
okay.
you
I've
does that
thought
mean to have the will to do
that
something?
that is a brilliant question, and I have thought about removing the word will because it's unnecessary and it does muddy the waters. The reason is it's poetic.
Fair enough.
It's marketing basically. So I'll be completely transparent about that. We could call it survival, action, and becoming if you want. Yeah, but it's almost like there's a drive, right? And where I mean, this is why the I've linked the modules that in twos is that where a will to survive comes from is a perception that there is danger in the environment or that there is I don't know food, something that's going to there's an away towards an away. So so if you want, will is comes from a perception of the environment. A will to act comes from a perception of the environment and a uh, there is danger. I need to communicate this to others and myself. Yeah. So that is where the will, I don't know if it's where the will to act comes from, but there is some kind of internal motivation going on. So you're communicating it to yourself somehow and also to the outside world. Yeah. To
Yeah.
change the outside world, to change the, I mean, I guess in a sense, this, and I'm just thinking this for the first time, a will to survive in the case of an amoeba, the amoeba can't change the environment all the way. All it can do is run away. Whereas Cookie can change the environment through communication.
An attack.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And then the will to become, if I have a memory of the past and I can project myself into the future using, I guess, I don't know, some of the same brain systems, then that is going to what is emerging is a will to become. So if you want to talk about emergence, well, there I've given it to you. How does this emerge? You could see how it would, at least. I can't test it or prove it in the next 5 minutes, right? But you can see how it would. And so my argument here, or my thesis, if you like, is that okay, it might not be complete. Okay, we haven't tested it, but it's a heck of a lot more complete than the alternative that seems to be prevalent, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. So I feel like the way that I have a clear picture now of what you're suggesting. And I feel like to me, I could I so I like the definition. I find the breakdown like interesting and it's useful to think about. It makes me think about like which things are evolutionary and like makes you think about how people work in certain ways that are fun to talk about. Um, but to and I agree with you, like without having, thought more about it beyond this conversation, like that all those things seem necessary. But when I listen to you, I feel like I'm applying my own filters to what you mean that depend on sort of like my subjective experience of being a human. And it would be much more difficult to like convince somebody who wasn't on my side. Like if I were to play devil's advocate, or if I was one of those people who really believed that like there's nothing special about being a human, and like it would be, computers are going to develop, the same level of consciousness and agency and sentience, whatever word you want to use, as people, at some points, in the future, then I feel like if I were one of those people, I'm not. I feel like I could pick at your definitions, and it would be difficult to like logically um, have a conclusion to that discussion. Like if you found someone who really wanted to fight that battle, I feel like it would be difficult to sort of like logically prove that a computer couldn't.
Oh,
It would be hard to be clear enough, like because a very very simple example, like, well, you could program a computer to have a will to survive, and how do you know
can,
that it does or doesn't,
well,
right?
can I?
Like that.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Please go ahead.
so you misunderstand me. I do think a computer could do these that could be programmed to do these things.
Okay.
Well, I mean, again, when I say I do think, what I mean is theoretically, I see no reason why silicon can't be made to do these things, right? So,
But do you
so
think it will happen like in the next 10 years
no.
or something?
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay,
I don't
that's
know.
that's what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, well, I
I
actually,
theoretically think that I agree with you.
yeah,
Theoretically,
yeah.
yes. Like I don't, yeah, I
Yeah,
don't think there's
the
some
point for me
theological
isn't the amount of
reason.
time because again that's again we're entering into a different conversation there, which can be teared down by people saying, well, computers, will be able to do things much quicker. So the timescale, I don't know. What I'm saying is, with what LLMs are now, there is not something emerging now that we could describe, if we were being intellectually honest, as agency. It's just not there. And if it is there, explain to me what it is and how it's happening, or at least even what it is, and give me evidence for it, which isn't your own previous definition, which you're then testing for. Okay. So,
Oh, definitely
so
agree with
with
you
the
on that.
technology as where it is now, it does not fulfill. And there are some of the things there which are early versions of these modules for sure, but there aren't enough of them. So what I'm saying is, for a machine to develop human agency, someone, a person, a human, needs to design modules to see if this works, needs to design modules which simulate these elements. And that no one's doing that. Well, they might be doing some of it, but no one's doing that. Well, because I've not told anyone about it. so I guess they're not. So no one's doing that. Therefore, it's not going to happen. Now, so my point here is that we probably don't want to do that. I don't know. Again, this is all theory, but it's not going to magically develop agency. Like an LLM is not magically going to develop agency because it doesn't have a will to survive. I don't know about the perception of its environment. It doesn't have a will to act. It does communicate, but again, even that's questionable in a sense. I guess it does communicate. It doesn't have a will to become, and even though something like Gemini has a 2 million context window, it doesn't have a persistent memory. So therefore, it's like so far away from agency. What are we doing? Let's worry about the
Yeah,
human beings who might design something like this and stop that from happening than this magical, I don't know what. That
totally.
is what
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
saying. Yeah.
Okay, I'm with you. Sorry, it like it maybe took longer than it needed to come full circle, but yeah, like today we definitely don't have anything close to that. And I think it's misleading if people are talking about it as if it is as if LLMs are doing something like what you mean by human agency. Like, no, um, definitely not close to that.
Yeah, and
So
what makes it so difficult is that I have an emotional experience with these LLMs. And that causes a human mind to think or feel certain things. And that it's almost like a perfect storm for human psychology for people to start believing things that aren't there.
yeah,
But it's really essential that at least the people who are building it and developing it and researching it start, as far as I can see anyway, start using words like agency carefully, and not saying it's got a little bit of agency. Again, did an amoeba however many years ago have a little bit of humanity? Well, I no, it was an it was a very, it was a non-evolved, it was where we maybe came from through evolution, but you couldn't say it had a little bit of humanity, right?
yeah.
So that's my objection. That's why I went down this rabbit hole and decided to like figure it out, because I think it's so important because
Yeah, I
a
like the way you just put it, a
yeah.
little bit of humanity. I think maybe that's the key thing where like the wires are getting crossed. Because yeah, I agree with you. You can't have just a little bit of humanity in a computer program. Like that's not how humanity really works.
No. Yeah, it's like, I think it also comes from and I'm actually listening to a book at the moment called Thinking in Systems, I think it's called. And it's about, I think partially comes down to the way that a lot of scientists have to think is in almost the micro, in the micro level, pulling things apart into their component parts, the reductionist sort of thing. And what
Hmm.
can happen is the problem is with that is that you not lose the ability, but you tend not to zoom out to the system level, where you realize that a thing is a collection of other things. Yeah, because you're just looking at like one small part and going, well, we have that, so therefore this thing is going to emerge. This system is going to emerge.
Yeah,
No, because it doesn't have the other components of that system. The system isn't that system unless it has those components, right?
yeah,
And I think that might be also what's going on here. It's almost like the framing of the subject area creates that kind of blind spot, if you like.
yeah, yeah. I can I can think of examples that that sort of that brings to mind. Like and it's confusing. It's confusing because when we hear people like sort of speculate about the future in a very confident way, you know, like because a lot of times we'll be like the easiest way to convince yourself or to sort of like reduce your uncertainty of something is to be like, well, AI definitely can't do this, whatever this is. Some example that comes to mind If it feels very much like it requires, humanity to do it. And then when that turns out to not have been exactly true the way you're thinking about it in that moment, then it gets confusing for the story, over time
Yeah,
as sort of like, but we are just people in a much larger like social system of lots of other people. And, we understand technology differently as it changes. And so like we also change our perceptions and opinions about like, um, when you realize that an LM can do certain things, like it makes you think differently about what those things are fundamentally, and where the humanity lies and where it doesn't, right?
exactly. Exactly. So, yeah, what are we going to do about this, John? How are we going to fix this?
Well, we gotta start thinking about the word agency, and that's going to be an uphill battle for sure, because like that one has already spread pretty far, and so I'll have a think about what I can do, and I'll be curious to run it by other people in AI and see what their definitions might be, and whether it sort of bothers them, or
And where the mistakes are in my thinking, I mean, I basically came up with this while on my computer while watching Lego Masters with my kids one Thursday evening, and so it might again my um, my contention here is not that it's complete or completely correct or anything like that, but it is more complete than what I see, the limited amount I see out there being discussed. So it's almost like it's on the people who have it less complete to disprove it. Right? What are you talking about if it's not
yeah,
this?
yeah, yeah. I think that's an important point, and that's like, yeah, the more general principle of like the burden of who who the burden of proof lies on. And if you're going to be an expert in something, it's it's more your responsibility to like be clear about um, how you're communicating,
Yeah.
I would say,
I mean, what you
to the
mean,
public.
what you mean by
Yeah.
this word? What exactly are you talking about? Brilliant. Well, we've talked about chickens, we've talked about amoebas, we've talked about humanity. It's a great place to stop. Thank you so much, John, for putting up with me waving my arms around and jumping up and down and getting my soapbox. Hopefully,
Anytime. It's
hopefully
always
this
fun.
will move the conversation forward. And yeah, I'll speak to you next time. So that conversation was obviously on the more philosophical side of things, and that's not the only thing we're going to do here on the Human Plus AI podcast. But honestly, because things are changing so fast in the world of AI, and aside from that, my understanding of AI is changing so quickly that I just kind of have to talk about the things that are in my mind at that time. And this whole agency reasoning thing became I was almost obsessed with it. And so I had to talk to John about it because he knows what he's talking about and I probably don't. But if you want more practical use cases for how I'm using AI, step by step stuff, consider checking out my Substack, which is really the hub for all of my AI work. I've embedded the Human Plus AI podcast in there, even though it's a separate thing. So you'll find the episodes we've done so far in there, but also in another section, you'll see the posts that I've put up. The first one is kind of like an introductory post, and then the second and third are actually step by step ways that I am using AI as a thinking partner rather than as a replacement. So if you're interested in that please subscribe to the Human Plus AI podcast, because we'll be doing practical stuff as well as the more philosophical, but also consider subscribing to the Recursive Intelligence Substack, and you'll find a link to that. Oh, and also there's a link to the Machine Learning Street Talk podcast, the conversation we were talking about in this episode, in the description, show notes as well. It's pretty much my favorite podcast at the moment, even though I understand probably about 50% of what they're talking about sometimes. But it's a fantastic podcast, amazing conversations, fair amount of lingo and jargon, but if you can get past that, I thoroughly recommend it. So with all that said, onwards and upwards.